Hello and welcome to the Dire Gentleman channel. I'm Gus Zagarella, and don't look at the man in the corner.
I'm Henry Galley, and I am the man in the corner.
He's the man in the corner of being our resident horror buff, and today we are talking about the Mandela Catalogue. Henry, what is the Mandela Catalogue? Why did you show me the Mandela Catalogue? And why is it so terrifying?
So, those are all the big questions we're going to explore today. As Gus alluded to, I'm a big horror fan, and while Gus wouldn't perhaps identify as a horror fan, he's a very open minded guy. When I discovered this new horror sensation that everyone is talking about, this amazing act of analog horror created by indie online artist Alex Kister, who is wonderful and scared the shit out of both of us, I thought this is something we need to discuss on the channel because anyone who knows us knows that we are all about shouting out indie art. Frankly, a huge amount of online indie creation on the internet does tend to fall into the horror realm.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you alluded to earlier that, I wouldn't identify myself as a horror fan, but I am someone who goes to media to feel intense emotions. And what
Hmm.
horror is aimed at doing is provoking a powerful fear response, one of the oldest human emotions, one of our basic survival instincts that carried us all the way from the days that we were banging stones together for fire to just keep that darkness a little further away from us. Let me tell you, this series, like a number of other horror projects on the internet, really shows what you can do with like the smallest of budgets and just the right amount of concept and passion.
Absolutely. And among the number of things we're going to discuss in this video is some of the specific techniques that the Mandela Catalogue employs and how effective they are and how they emotionally affected us. But before we get any deeper in, now that we're over 1 minute in as well, I do feel the need to specify if you want to check out the Mandela Catalogue yourself, which I thoroughly recommend if you haven't already, do be warned major trigger warnings for suicide and unreality, which are major themes throughout. So just if that's something that you're not going to be able to handle, steer clear of this one.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in regards to the Mandela Catalogue. It's one of the pieces of media that I've described as evil, in a sense.
Yeah.
The creatures, the monsters, these alternates, as they're called. The first thing I said to Henry after I finished this is, I think I hate them.
Yeah. I think what Alex Kister has done here has made such a unique new mythos. So basically, without giving too much away, the premise of the show is that it's set in a kind of alternate world in the early 90s, I believe. I think 1992, but don't quote me on that. Where the world has been invaded by these mysterious and incredibly malicious beings called alternates, which, as their name suggests, they are like alternate versions of people on Earth, some in a kind of like doppelganger, very similar to pre existing people style, and some which are these like truly like terrifying, warped, otherworldly beings, and they are led by what appears to be an alternate of the Archangel Gabriel, which some theorize to be like Satan or Lucifer.
The mythology of this show really begins with that whole notion of the alternate angel Gabriel. The first video on the channel, Overthrown, shows essentially a different version of Gabriel visiting Mary and Joseph. And I think that that implies that that is the splitting off point. And if we're to follow through on the biblical implications of that, it's a much scarier, much more godless world that invites horrible things into it.
They do this in such a fascinating way. Alex has used kind of an old public domain Bible like cartoon and edited it in a fashion to kind of express this, which, as Gus was saying earlier, I think a huge thing that all internet horror, but especially the Mandela catalog has taught us is it's really not about the money. It's about the creativity because everything in this is either things that Alex has made himself or fascinatingly recontextualized public domain material.
There's a later thing that uses footage of police cars and ambulances moving around in a sequence that describes all the ways that the people of Mandela County can call into the emergency authorities and get help which leads into a chilling moment of realization that the authorities do not want to help people who are being attacked by alternates because they're just that hard to deal with.
It's done in this kind of fascinating, what I'd call mixed epistolary style, where we have a mix of like camcorder footage from Mark Heathcliff, one of the characters in this, who is a victim of the alternates, recordings of like phone calls, kind of PSAs released by the government to the public, internal use, like police training materials. Like it's showing all of these different angles that make this world feel so incredibly realized and frightening.
The rest of it, you kind of fill in the blanks and imagine it being mostly like our world. After all, it has the same sort of religious underpinnings, the same sort of locations and geography. It's just this like this element of it is so thoroughly explored in the material we get in the Mandela Catalogue that you almost feel like it dominates an otherwise relatable world, to the point that you imagine yourself living in just a version of reality that is so hostile to anyone in it that it's immediately terrifying. And it makes you paranoid of like not just these alternates, but the fact that they so closely resemble humans but are just slightly off makes you imagine just being in this world, being paranoid of any voice or any interaction with any other human being.
Yeah, which I think segues into a kind of thematic element that I want to talk about here, because something that's really important to understand, people watching this, is horror is something that you can use on sort of every level. It's something that you can help express through the technical elements, as we've discussed with like the frightening use of recontextualized footage. It's something that can be sort of employed through character, story, world building elements, like this whole idea of like a world under assault by alternates. And I think horror can also exist very much in the themes of a piece. I think a major theme that is really why the Mandela Catalogue has sort of touched so many people's hearts is, I think in so many ways this is a show about how humanity responds to existential threats. To link back to this discussion of public domain materials, Gus and I have been going through a lot ourselves lately to like find material for creative projects, and I watched that old Duck and Cover cartoon from the 50s. Do you know the one?
Oh yes, yeah, the classic nuclear bomb PSA, like to keep people supposedly safe of the threat of a bomb dropping by ducking in cover under desks.
Exactly, and I found that to be a really interesting comparison to this, because you watch that now and you're like, oh, this was purely made to stop people from panicking, because if you duck under a desk when a nuclear bomb blows up, you and your desk are being turned to irradiated ash. But the government has to put stuff out to pacify people, much like how they pretend, oh yeah, if the alternate comes in, you can try shooting them, but really just stay calm, stay in your home. Then when you look at their internal material, it's like, oh yeah, no, if an alternate gets them, they're as good as dead already. Just leave them be.
It's so funny because you bring up duck and cover, and I remember the words of the comedian Lewis Black when he did a bit about that, and it was, they want us to hide from a fire fucking ball under kindling.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so
And
true.
it's the same way that like the government says like, "Oh yeah, you can try to execute these alternates, so always keep a gun on you." And like the full picture makes it seem like, okay, the gun is there so that when people off themselves, it's a little bit cleaner and easier to manage.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, yeah, you are not going to be able to just gun down effectively like the spawn of Lucifer from like
Yeah,
another dimension here
exactly.
to like these things can talk you to death.
They are biologically impossible in the way that they can appear. The ones that look the most like humans, like the doppelgangers, it's seemingly like their choice to do that.
I think a really effective method that the Mandela Catalogue uses to induce fear as well is there is a real pervasive sense of hopelessness to it, which I think is where your earlier descriptor of it being evil comes in, Gus, because I think things that feel evil Much like Hereditary, for example, or The Mist, the Junji Ito's Hanging Balloons, there is this sense of, oh, damned if they do, damned if they don't, they never had a chance. That's what evil feels like in narrative fiction, in my opinion.
Again, I'm kind of caught up in dwelling on like the specifics of like the plot in this too, because the fact that like a lot of what the alternates are doing seems to be, other than killing grown adults, it seems like they take just children out of the picture. Whether those children become alternates or are just gone at a very early age, it reminded me of kind of the mythical motif of the changeling child,
Yes.
where like a being, usually like a witch or something, will steal a human's child and then like replace it. This was sometimes used to explain like stillbirths back in like the sort of more superstitious times of the past. It's carried over into the modern era in such a way that it plays on the whole remaining fear of kidnapping that never really left, especially in American culture.
Yeah, and I think we have that same kind of stranger danger fear in the UK. But I think overall, what's really interesting to build on what you were saying, Gus, is that while obviously this is being approached in universe through kind of the paradigm of the Christian mythos with, kind of angels, demons, etc., the fundamental fear of the alternates so strong and like so simple that you can approach it through a number of mythological frameworks.
Yeah. Now I wanted to talk about another moment where like the budget was utilized in a really great way. Perhaps one of my favorite is a weird word for this, but one of the bits that frightened me the most, both in my initial watch and the rewatch, and it's when there is an alternate appearance in a house conveyed through a series of images, and one of the images just has a large black box with a text reading that the victim's body was being manipulated through an invisible force. And you don't see the
Yeah.
corpse, but what you do get the sense of is, well, behind that black box is the most terrifying fucking thing I have ever comprehended with my senses. So I'm glad the black box is there. But here's the thing, the way that those images are, I guarantee that like that is just the same picture of that stairwell that we were already looking at. Our brains are just creating the additional context of the image without them needing to get like a big expensive corpse prop.
Yeah, exactly. Horror, in many ways, is like executing a magic trick. It's all about sleight of hand and the power of suggestion. It's a masterclass in like less is more, because there will be so many instances where that they have just little things in the way they will manipulate sound or text suggest so much more. Like another very frightening scene when Mark is trapped in his room and the alternate on the other side of the door is mimicking in a kind of frightening, warped way Caesar's voice. On the screen, it says something like, "I don't want to know what's on the other side of that door."
And your brain creates the rest of it, and that's followed up with like, it has been days and nobody has come. So you just, the whole situation, and all it is voiceover, footage of a door, and then the implication of this being the worst possible scenario that anybody could be in.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a big fan of the Mandela Catalogue, of horror in general, if you want to make something like this yourself, watch it a bunch more times until slowly the kind of fear starts to dull. And then at that point, start to ask yourself, okay, what am I actually looking at? What am I actually hearing? And the excess is what your imagination creates from that. And you will realize how simple, but elegantly so, the composition of elements are in a way that lets your mind do the heavy lifting and freak the fuck out of you. Because bear in mind, there is not a second of on-screen violence in this whole thing.
It's much like what I said about Hereditary on multiple watches in our video on that. Once you get past the initial fear and you've started just watching the movie as a craft, you start to notice the strange and uncanny symmetry. It's kind of a mechanism designed to evoke a certain feeling.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's why I am a huge believer in, if there's a piece of art that fascinates you, watch it multiple times and watch it critically, because you will start to be able to engage with it and understand it in a way you didn't before. And I know for a fact that despite the fact it frightens us, this won't be the last time either of us watch this. And I imagine when Volume 2 comes out, as it will, I believe, next month, we'll probably rewatch Volume 1 again to get ready for it.
Yeah, well, it is just on its own something that I really like, but the rewatching aspect of it is so important for especially guys like us who are trying to make indie art of our own, and for anyone out there who is like trying to make their own like sort of horror video projects. This is a lot to take note of because it's not about how real you can make the internal circumstances of your thing. It's about how real the reactions and feelings you can evoke in the audience are.
Exactly, exactly. It's less about making it believable and more about making us believe it.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I'm very impressed with it. As someone who was like a big fan of like, the OG sort of Slenderman mythos, Marble Hornets back in the day, I feel like that sort of stuff is finally making a comeback. People are getting out there, they're making stuff, and even like something like this, since it's reliant on mostly stock photos and things that can be done like completely solo, you don't have to worry about COVID as a barrier to start making really interesting, really cool, and really terrifying shit.
I completely agree. And before we go, I just have two questions for the audience. Number one, what do you think was the scariest moment in the Mandela Catalogue? Let us know down in the comments because I'm genuinely really curious to see like which parts affected people and why. And the second thing is, if we make more videos sort of discussing indie online horror and what makes them work, how the scares are executed, etc., are there any projects you'd really like to see us cover? I know we have consideration of things like Gemini Home Entertainment, Local 58, things like that, but there's a whole world of them out there. So if there's any that you're really itching to see us cover, please do let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to know. We always love to champion new weird stuff, and we always like to expand our own catalog of things we watch.
Yeah, completely agree. So be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more of that.
Exactly. And until that next time comes, we'll be seeing you
It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk.